What is going on, Tentacrew? My name is Billy the Squid, and leave it to a game about Pinocchio to be suffering from an identity crisis. Today, we are going to be talking about Lies of P, the newest Souls-like to come out of Meowits and Round 8 Studios, and set to release in just over a month. This Souls-like is taking the dark fantasy world of Pinocchio and putting a Souls-like spin on it. If you're familiar with the American McGee's Alice games and how they took the Alice in Wonderland story and turned it into a dark fantasy video game, then this is going to be very, very familiar. Set in a Victorian-style steampunk world where the puppet animatronics have turned against their creators, masters, and the society that has been building and using them, this plot seems almost familiar to the prior Souls-like title we had in Steel Rising, but changes out that French aspect for a more bloodborne aesthetic. And while Steel Rising, although it was a competent Souls-like, failed to hit the marks to make it truly stand out and flourish in this overflowing genre, Lies of P seems to be doing the exact opposite, getting critical acclaim just from its demo alone. Being praised for its level design, mood, and overall flow of combat, Lies of P actually brings several unique and novel things to the Souls-like genre, such as the way you make choices in the game, whether they be lies or telling the truth, affecting which way your story is going to go. And while choice making has never been a unique thing to the Souls-like genre, it's never been done with such flavor or pizzazz that Lies of P is throwing out there, directly injecting itself into that Pinocchio mythos. On top of this, we have a weapon building system where you can take hilts and blades and interchange them to make whatever weapon suits your fancy, as well as a unique and honestly very interesting and intriguing take on the weapon durability systems. Combine all of this with the Sekiro style prosthetic system, outfitting one of your arms with many different tools to suit whatever need you have, whether that be a grappling hook to pull enemies closer, a flamethrower to keep them at bay, or sometimes you just need to punch your problems away with a giant metal fist. Lies of P has all of this for you. But where it does falter, and the only issues I have with the combat system so far, is the very topic of this video, the identity crisis of the game, and it all falls into the defensive systems of Lies of P. If you're familiar with the Souls-like genre, you know that defense is probably the most important aspect of these games. The games are already designed to kill you very quickly, and if you don't have a firm grasp on how you're supposed to avoid this damage, it can lead to a very frustrating and repetitive gameplay loop. And from my time with the demo, this is the only aspect of the game where Lies of P falters. Since the dawn of time when Miyazaki pulled the first Souls-like out of the primordial ooze, there have usually been two primary ways of negating damage, that being either the dodge mechanic or a parry mechanic. Dodging is the more traditional form of preventing your buns from being baked, and it comes with two big benefits. One, the invincibility frames from the dodge itself, and two, the distance that you travel while in this animation. And while there have been many different adaptations on the dodge system, such as the more traditional Dark Souls dodge roll, the Bloodborne dash and slash, or whatever Dark Souls 2 is doing with adaptability, making it so that iframes was a stat, dodging has always been a quintessential part of this genre. But in the more recent titles, we have gotten a second variety of Souls-like game, one that is built more upon a melodic, almost rhythmic system of parrying. Ever wanted your Souls-like to play more like Guitar Hero? Well, where there's a will, there's a way. And Sekiro and Thymesia are both prime examples of taking this more rhythmically based system, learning an enemy's movements and countering appropriately at the right time, and turning it into an entire gameplay loop. When done well, it is an exceptional feel, keeping you right in the action and making every encounter almost feel like a dance. The reason I bring all of this up is because Lies of P has the unique problem of having dodging to the left of it, parrying to the right, and then Lies of P is stuck right in the middle with all of these options and no clear direction on where to take them. And this isn't even necessarily the game's problem itself, whereas the community has just labeled it as needing to behave this certain way just because of the looks of it. I mentioned earlier that this game shares a very similar aesthetic to Bloodborne, and unfortunately, whenever you set a game in Victorian England, that is going to be the case. But due to this very apparent visual similarity, people have already tried to start playing it as if it is Bloodborne and have gotten frustrated in the process of doing so. I'm just going to be blunt with you guys. The dodging in this game is not great. There's a little bit of a clunk or chug to start up your dodge animation. At the end of each one of your dodge, you kind of get to stand in place a little bit before you can do something else. And overall, you just don't go very far and don't seem to have very many iframes while in this animation. The game does give you ways to circumvent this, in the fact that the lighter you are, the further you are able to dodge, the heavier making it even shorter than what it already is at base. And in the full release of the game, there's going to be the P organ system, which is a skill tree that will allow you to modify your dodging in some unique ways, making a double dodge possible, as well as some other aspects to your dodge that I'm sure we'll figure out later. And while this won't hinder mid to late game characters that much if these dodge modifications are meaningful additions, it is going to make the beginning of the game the place where you need to grab your audience and get them hooked into your game. If they want to play it in a dodge-centered way, not feel super great. And it just goes back to that Dark Souls 2 mindset where you have to level up a stat to be able to enjoy the game in that style. And I think this is purely intentional. I don't think this is meant to be a dodge-centered game, but the looks of the game and people's need and want and desire for a Bloodborne 2 is trying to force a square peg into a round hole. I do firmly believe that this game is going to be mostly centered around the parry mechanic, which in its current state still needs work in and of itself. And despite all of the issues with the current parrying system that we'll get to later, there are too many mechanics built into Lies of P that directly benefit and play around this parrying system. So many, in fact, that it would almost be a shame if this was a dodge-centered game, that you wouldn't even get to interact with most of these options. The weapon durability system, for instance, is almost like a resource management in this game, where attacking and doing blocks is going to degrade your weapon's durability, and at some point during combat, especially with boss fight encounters, you're going to have to grind your weapon back up to full resistance, or else it could shatter on you. And while inevitably you're always going to be attacking and lowering that durability in that way, just straight up blocking is going to reduce your weapon's resistance significantly quicker than when you do a proper parry. On top of this, they've added a new system of stagger into the game called Groggy, where if you attack or parry enemies enough, it will put them into a vulnerable state where you can do a power attack and knock them down, a la a visceral attack from Bloodborne, Dark Souls 3, Elden Ring, and so on. And while you can keep up rampant aggression and build up that groggy meter by attacking on itself, parrying builds this up significantly quicker, with the added benefit of if an enemy is using a weapon themselves, then you can actually break their weapon before your weapon itself breaks with proper parrying. This has many different benefits, making the enemy hit you less hard, have less reach, and overall changes how the enemy is going to behave and interact with you yourself, potentially even making your dodge a lot more useful now that the enemy doesn't have such an extended sweeping range. And lastly, this game has its own version of a rally system, although it's a little bit awkward in its current iteration. How you build up rally is by blocking an attack regularly straight up. This will make it so that you take damage, but the bar itself is kind of grayed out. If you then go forward and do attacks, you can build that bar back up and get some of that lost health back. Whereas if you do a perfect parry, this is not the case. You take no damage and you don't have to worry about rallying yourself back. But I do think that if the game is able to evolve and refine itself before its final release, this rally system could be a very, very important mechanic within the game. And this all feeds into how I think they can refine this game and make it the game that I think the developers want it to be. And while it might not be the game that some of the audience that are expecting this to be Bloodborne 2 might want, I think it is for the betterment of this game and further separating itself from what has come before it. Dodging being used for distance, I think, is perfectly fine, and I think a lot of the P organ skill tree systems can help modify that distance that you can either gain or get away from certain enemies. But I don't think this should be the primary source of defense. And while parrying might be a high-risk, high-reward scenario in the game's current iteration, there's only some minor tweaks I think they need to make it a truly fun and enjoyable give and take within the combat space of this game. Hell, I don't even think they need to increase the parry window in this game from what it was in the demo. I think the parry window is fine, but it is just a little bit too high risk considering that before the parry goes off and after the parry goes off, you are susceptible to the full brunt of the damage. And I think the answer to this problem lies in the past, looking back at Sekiro and how it handled its parrying system. The way Sekiro was able to get away with such a high risk, high reward playstyle was that they took a little bit of the risk away from the players without making it outwardly apparent. Both Sekiro and Lies of P have both the block and the parry button on the same button. But what Sekiro does differently is whenever you raise your sword up to parry, you have those initial parry frames. But then after you let go of the button, you still have a defensive stance as that sword comes back down through the animation. This is something I think Lies of P could drastically benefit from, making it so that even if you mistime your parry at the start, maybe you parry a bit too early, you will still have those block frames as the weapon comes back down to soak up some of that damage, give you that rally bar so that you're able to give it back instead of just taking the full brunt of the damage on the chin. Because as it stands right now, Lies of P, if you don't hold that button all the way, as soon as you let go of the button, whether it's to block or parry, you are susceptible. This will make it so that timing is still important, as parrying late is still going to make you take it on the chin. But if you parry a little bit early, you're not going to be punished as heavily, and you can still have a unique interaction with whatever you're fighting through the rally system. I feel like Lies of P's rally mechanic is a punishment that gives you a way of fighting back for it, and separates itself enough from Sekiro's stance break system that it feels unique to this game specifically. Finish it out with just add a stance bar, add a grogginess meter underneath of enemy health so that you actually know that your parries are drastically affecting the enemies. And I think this will make it so that it is obvious from the get-go how the game wants you to play, and there won't be as much frustration or confusion with players in the early onset of the game. And I'm not saying that I want dodging to be completely useless in this game either. I do feel like having a refined and very precise version of a primary defense mechanic only makes the secondary and tertiary defense mechanics shine that much more, because there are going to be systems where you need to get out of an AoE or you need to close distance that the parry mechanic's just not going to be able to help you with, but these other ones can. Regardless of what direction the developers go, I am very excited for Lies of P to come out next month, and I want to know if you guys are too. Let me know down in the comments below if you played the demo, what you thought of the demo. Are you going to be picking this up day one? Let us know. And if you are interested in seeing Lies of P gameplay whenever it first comes out, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. We will be doing Lies of P and other Souls-like content well into the future, and like the video if you enjoyed it. Until next time, Tender Crew, my name is Billy the Squid. Much love. Bye-bye.